Today we're going to talk about nationalism. There are 193 UN recognized countries and nations around the world. Each of these 193 countries, they have their own borders, they have their own flags, they have their own political system and mix of cultures within each of those countries. But if we go back few centuries ago, we realize that there was no concept of country or nation back then. And for most of last 3000 years, we didn't have such a concept. There were empires that start from a very small tribe, and this small tribe could conquer land and get control over a vast area of the world. And then after a few decades or few hundred years, the empire collapse and new groups of people come and expand and make new empires. So all these borders of empire constantly changing. Although there was no specific nations in those times, but in certain areas, certain cultures and civilization develop within those empires that kind of we could map it to today's nation states. For example, if you look at areas like China that were ruled over centuries by different empires, and it was sometimes smaller, sometimes bigger land, ruled by different empires and dynasties. But nonetheless, after all these centuries, there was cultures develop in this area that lead to the rise of a modern nation state. Today we know it as China. This is the same as other part of the world like India. We had empires that rule over different parts of India. Sometimes a culture get dominated to the whole Indian subcontinent, and sometimes some other culture either from Indian subcontinent or from other part of the world come and dominate the cultural landscape of India. It is the same with Persia. Is it the same with Roman Empire and all these countries that we know today? Throughout centuries, there were some cultural precedent for these specific countries. But there are many nations today that, when we look at their history and what the nation we know today, there is a huge difference between what was happening in history of this land and what country is part of today. This land is part of values. So, as we look at these nation states, each nation has its own national interest, meaning each nation, 193 nations we have, each nation want to pursue its own national interest. And we have a limited amount of resources on this planet for humans, for all these 193 different nations. So as you can see, we have limited amount of resources on this earth, and we have 193 different national interests. These different national interests would eventually collide with each other, as it did throughout the last few decades. Because when there is disagreement between countries on different resources that they want to control or different land that they want to control, they either need to solve these problems through diplomacy or they need to go to war to settle down this dispute. And these create a cycle of endless wars that is has its own roots in concept of nationalism, an ideology that human came up with few decades ago. Although nationalism is one step higher than the concept most of human history we were experiencing, the concept of tribes or city states, or even the concept of empires and dynasties that would not have a certain rules and orders that could regulate the relationship between empires better and would cause wars much more and in a larger scale that it did under nationalism. Each nation needs to come up with ideals and values that shape the character of that nation. These ideals and values could have its roots in the history of that nation or that group of people, or could be something new that people came up with in the last few decades or few hundreds of years. If you look at China and the US, you see China's values and ideals is the mixture of some values and ideas that came from their history, their culture that go back thousands of years, and some ideals and values are new. But if you look at the US, you see that in the primary the inhabitants of America, Native Americans, they lived here, they had their own cultures, but the values that the country of United States going forward with is something new, is a combination of republic values that come from ancient Rome and democratic values that come from ancient Greece, and is mixed together with new characteristics and new ideas that is added to the mixture. So, as you can see, these different values come up in the character of each nation. Each nation also needs to come up with the education system, different subject that fit that specific nation. One subject that's very important is history. They need to write the history of that nation in a way that overemphasize on the importance of their action, their values, their worldview, and downplay the importance of other parts of the world. Sometimes they blame other nation for something that they did themselves but is not in history books. So as you can see, there are three areas that nation create a mindset, understanding of the world for its citizen that is not going to be in harmonious coexisting with other nations. So, under nationalism, we have different interests, national interests, that is not in harmony with the national interest of other countries. We have educational system, we have history, the way we look at the world, that is not in harmony with the understanding of the world with other nations. And we have the value system, ideals, that could be in contradiction with other nation and not in harmony. In order to get a more accurate picture of the world, not the distorted picture that the mainstream media tries to show us, we need to go beyond propaganda that is inherent in the DNA of nation states. We need to reach people from other nations, other countries, to communicate with them, try to understand their cultures, try to understand their point of understanding of the world, their point of view of the world, the way they look at the world, their experiences. And the more we could talk about people from other cultures that we think is so foreign to us, we realize that we are much more similar to each other than different. And the difference that was in our mind and in our understanding of the world and people in other nation was something that was planted in us in the educational system that we grew up. This educational system tries hard to distinguish us from the people around the world, try to create a concept us versus them, try to teach us that those are not born within the border of this nation state are foreign or they're alien, meaning alien as if they come from other planets. I really like to know your ideas. Please write in the comment section. Thank you and see you in the next video.